See, the first guy hadn't even finished talking about the attack from the Sabians when the second guy shows up and he says it's not just our neighbors that are attacking us, but the fire of God has fell down on us. And I'm sure that it looked like to Job and some of these boys that God himself had turned against them and attacked them. Can I ask you today, had God turned against Job? Absolutely not. And when bad things happen in your life, it's so easy sometimes to say, if God really loved me, he wouldn't let these things happen to me. I challenge you today that God loved Job as much as you can imagine or even more, and he still allowed bad things to happen. Fire burned up all the sheep and his servants. Verse 17 says, and while he was yet speaking, there came another, and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away, yea, slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped to tell thee. See, old Job, he had something like 3,000 camels. He was, I guess you'd call it, he was in the trucking industry back in those days. And somebody came in, now these Chaldeans, these other enemies have come in and destroyed all of his people, taken all of his camels, and now Job is left with nothing. He's lost all of his herds, he's lost all of his riches, he's lost many of his friends, and he's sitting there brokenhearted. And all that's going on, verse 18 says, and while he was yet speaking, there came another also. You know, it comes a time when you want to quit answering the phone, because news has just got so bad. Look what happened in verse 18. He says, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Now I want you to put yourself in Job's frame of mind for a moment. 4 messengers show up. They don't even get through telling their story before the next one comes in. Catastrophe, disaster, attacks, acts of God. And as soon as Job's hearing the news about losing his riches and his wealth and his herds, and then all of a sudden the dearest thing to his heart, his 10 children all got killed at once. I've had to sit, unfortunately, with many people in gravesides as they've buried their children. And I'm going to tell you something, no parent should ever have to bury a child. It just ain't natural. And for you parents that have been there, and unfortunately some of you have, you understand better than anybody else how deep that hurt is. And you know what? We can't even begin to imagine what would happen if we had 10 young'uns and every one of them died at once. I was coming back one day, we was over here, I think it was at a fall festival a few years ago, and we'd forgot something at the house and was going to run home and get it real quick, and Cheryl and Jesse, my sister and my niece, jumped in the car with me, and we run over to the house, and on the way back, a deer ran out the road, and Cheryl was making me drive a little faster than I should have been, and see, when that deer ran out in front of me, y'all didn't catch it, I swerved a little bit, and we slid a little bit, 90 miles an hour. And I know, Mama, I'm sorry, sis made me do it. But when we got back, my sister tells my mother what happened, because she's a narc. And so now we have a standing rule in my home. Me and my sister and my niece are never allowed to be in the same vehicle again, especially if I'm driving. Because Mama said I almost lost my whole family right there in one fatal swoop. Can I tell you, Job did lose all of his. All 10 children killed. And you know what? It wasn't an attack of the enemy. It was a wind. A storm came up. A God-created storm that God could have prevented and God could have protected. And Job knew he could because he'd been praying for his youngest daily. But now that man sits there with 10 graves to dig. Not to mention all the herds he's lost, all the servants and the friends that he's lost. Those 10 children stick out much sorer than any of it. But then a very interesting thing happens. The old devil goes back to God, and the Lord says, well, what did you think about my servant Job? and all this stuff's going on. I want you to notice before we get to that, verse 20 of chapter 1 says this. Then Job arose and rent his mantle, or he tore his shirt or his clothes. He shaved his head, and he fell down upon the ground and worshiped. 10 children gone. All your riches gone. Your friends murdered. Your children you're fixing to have to bury. The man gets up. He's so distraught. He rips his clothes. He shaves his head. Why does he shave his head? He shaves his head. It's a sign of mourning when he goes anywhere he goes. When he goes to Walmart, he don't want people coming up talking to him and being friendly. He wants everybody to see him know that I am heartbroken. I don't have the strength to talk to you. I don't need to hear your encouragement. I don't want to hear your feeble words to come by and say it's going to be okay. You ain't sat where I've sat. You ain't hurt like I've hurt. Y'all leave me alone and let me and God work this out. I'm going to tell you, folks, how has your week been? Because some of us have walked through death this week. We've been in those hospitals, nursing homes, funeral homes. We've been to those places where our hearts have been broken. And I'm telling you, old Job was to a point that he would never again be the same. But thank God, the last part of verse 20 says, he fell upon the ground and he worshiped God. At the very point that many of us would got mad at God, when his situation turned from terrific to tragic, old Job worshiped. Look what he said in verse 21. He says this, and Job said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Wow. Now, maybe y'all like super spiritual, and to y'all that's like, oh, I could do that. But no, I ain't gonna say that, man. Because if I had to sit where Job's sitting right now, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know that I could handle it, and I doubt you could either, man. It would be more than I could possibly bear. I wish that God would give us the strength to say the prayer that Job said and say, blessed be the name of the Lord. But interestingly, verse 22 says, in all this Job sinned not, nor did he charge God foolishly. He didn't blame God for anything. Well, see, that's not only his sincere worship, but that's his sad worship. In our sadness, in our heartbreak, we find out what true worship is. You know something? I believe with all my heart some of the greatest preaching that I've ever experienced in my life has been times I've stood up in funerals. I think there's something special about a funeral when people are hurting and sad and heartbroken that God reaches down and touches in a miraculous way. And I'm telling you something, folks, I have seen God touch souls, heal hearts, and things like that during their time of sadness that he could have never touched people when they're smiling and things is going well. But our sad worship is sincere worship and it's true worship before God. But after all this happened, the old devil goes back to God. And God the Father goes, hey, devil, what about old Job? Old boy staying true to my word, ain't he? You know what the old devil says to him? Chapter 2, verse 4 tells a story, and it says this. And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. Question comes up today, what would you give for your life? What would you give? See, I have sat with many people as they drew their last breath. And a lot of times when we're on our last few moments of life, what's really important comes into focus for us. I've never heard a person on their deathbed say, I sure wished I'd have worked extra overtime. Made for my family. I've never heard a person on their deathbed say, I wish they had a little bit bigger, fancier house or a newer car. But you know what? Things come into focus when you begin to suffer. And that's why the last thing I want to talk about, our suffering worship. Old Job says to, or the devil says to God, all that a man hath will he give for his life. In other words, he's saying, God, you protected even his life through this. But if you take his health away, I bet he'll curse you then. So God tells the devil in verse 6, the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. I can't believe God would give the devil permission to do that. He said, you can go and hurt him if you want to. You can do anything you want to my servant Job, but do not kill him. The devil goes in verse 7. Immediately it says, and he smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. What's happened? Old Job has got boils from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. His entire body is racked with pain and suffering to the point that he takes broken pieces of pottery and scrapes the scabs and the boils off of him. He's in such pain and misery, not to mention he's lost all of his wealth and his riches, not to mention he's got to bury 10 young ones. Now his health is gone too, and it's seems like God is mad at Job. Nothing could be farther from the truth. But then it says this, verse 9. Then said Job's wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. Not only was he suffering, but he was also tempted by his wife. She said, Job, you've hurt so much. Why don't you just curse God and die and get it over with? Verse 10 says this. Job said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. Oh, man, some of you women couldn't take that, could you? How dare him talk to me like that? Let me tell you something, ladies. We love you and we appreciate your input. We need and value your opinions. But Job says, look, woman, you don't understand what God's got going on here. Job didn't understand it either, but he knew this much. The last thing I need to do is give up on God. As a matter of fact, Job's probably saying to his wife, honey, the only thing we've got is God. Hey, by the way, the only thing the devil did not take from Job was his wife. Why? Because the devil could use her better alive than he could dead. Careful, ladies. Careful, men. That never happened again. Yeah, ask Adam how that worked out, okay? Now, before y'all flog me and get on me here, I want to tell you, God put man and woman together as one, so that together we can seek God's wisdom. Why? Because individually we get weak, individually we get discouraged, we get depressed, we want to give up on God, but He puts us together so that one can help lift up the other, and when one gets ready to give up, the other one can help lift up. Folks, I'm here to tell you today, God allowed His wife to come even though she said, why don't you curse God and die? Job said, no, woman, we got to learn from this. God's got a purpose going on here. And then he worshiped God again. The Bible says in verse 10, what shall we receive good at the hand of God and shall not receive evil? And all this did not Job sin with his lips. Job was tempted and he suffered and he still worshiped God. You know something, I can't hardly imagine what it must have been like to go through all he went through. But for just a couple of seconds here, we're going to have an altar call in just a couple of minutes. But before we do, I want you to think about what all is going on in your life. And I don't know what you're dealing with, but I know most of you are dealing with some pretty heavy situations. Consider Job this morning. Consider what the Lord is trying to teach this old boy here. Now let your heart meditate on that for just a moment as we watch this video.